Well, that song leads us nicely to the next testimony. We've been led down winding paths and weary steps because Belinda's going to share about her walk. And in a way, this is kind of part two of what Belinda shared last month, because it's the kind of culmination of your plans to support the... Just tell us a little bit about just why you're doing the walk and that kind of thing, and I'll hand over to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I set out to start to raise funds and awareness for the Immanuel farm based in Bethlehem under the guidance of Pastor Nihad, which I was taken to via the tour I went on to the Holy Land. And I came back and I had the desire to put together a plan of action to raise some funds, which I did, and which I successfully completed. So, which way am I going?
Arrow to the right.
Other way.
The arrow to the right.
To the right, that's it.
And one more. There
There we go. Right. So thank you for the opportunity to stand here and just to tell you about my adventure and what I learned along the way. My initial discussion with Andrew about planning the walk, I spoke of Jesus sending his disciples out 2 by 2 and to take nothing with them. And this was before Pentecost. Andrew voiced his concern about my personal safety, but I assured him that I would be fine because I would not be alone, as Pentecost had passed. However, I did not travel light. That is my route from Newark down to Otford, which I did my best to follow. So I left the NEC after receiving my blessing, and I walked to Farndon and I dropped the dogs off, and then I crossed over the A46 and headed to Long Beddington. I knew I had a problem and had developed a blister before I passed the cycle route at Cottam, just behind the wind turbines and about an hour's walk from home. I had a decision to make. I chose to keep moving forward and found a spot in Long Beddington to bin my new hiking socks and put on an old pair. And I was directed to the Royal Oak, and I took stock of my situation. After crossing the A52, I found myself on the Viking Way, which is there, which starts at Burton upon Humber and ends at Oakham, Rutland. I had 1 bottle of water left, and I stopped close to a house to take a rest, and I dropped the bottle and it shattered on the ground. My only option was to knock on the door of the house. The window quickly opened and a very kindly lady popped her head out and asked if I required water. By now the backpack was becoming extremely heavy. I was needing regular breaks and took advantage of my solar battery charger, which became fondly known as Wally, and my very prized possession. I made camp at the shipman's plantation and felt so safe and secure that I fell asleep at 7:30. I'd covered 18.5 miles and started to acknowledge that in all likelihood I would not physically be able to catch up the distance I'd lost by starting a day later than planned. I woke early the following morning and continued along the trail, heading south and very much aware that I needed water. By now I was walking along the canal and started to encounter people and knew that I was close to civilization. I was directed to the Brewers Fayre, where I had breakfast and topped up on water. Then I took out my map to plan my next steps, only to find out and I was in Grantham and not south on the Viking Way. But a mile away from the train station and 15 miles from home, I encountered another dilemma. Do I go home or do I continue? I decided that was going to be the day that I would catch up the lost miles, and I took a train to Peterborough and then another one to St. Newts. By now I needed to bathe my foot and stock up on dressings. I came to a roundabout and I met an elderly gentleman and his dog. He instructed me to go to the Barley Mow, which was across the road, and assured me that I would receive assistance there. Tony was the bar lady and was very welcoming, and I explained to her and the regulars who had sent me. Vernon, the Welshman, and his dog Bobby arrived, and we chatted for some time as we all figured out my next course of action. I was sent off to the Premier Inn, which was less than 2 miles away. By now, the maps had to go, and I was not in a position to camp as I needed to be able to nurse my foot. I covered 13 miles and 2 train journeys and feeling a little lost, but going in the right direction. Day 3 was a good day. I covered 21.5 miles. After dumping 3.5 kilograms at the post office. Who carries the Bible in their backpack when they have an app on their telephone? My maps went, my 800 grams of nuts went, and I was recharged. I walked along the A1 on the footpath to Biggleswade. On passing through Langford, I received encouragement from the Thai Farm Close and Peace Cottage. And I went on to Letchworth Garden City to the Premier Inn. Day 4, I caught the train to Potter's Bar and dumped another 2.5 kilograms at the post office and enjoyed the walk into Edmonton with a view of the London skyline in the distance. By now, I'd figured out that the best places to stop for help were the pubs. I found the Lamb. I was directed to a travel lodge, and I was warned of the homeless people who were housed there. I'd covered 11 miles and enjoyed the diversity of the environment that reminded me of the South African suburbs. Day 5, I had learned not to plan my route for the next day in the evening and to wait in the morning, and the plan would be revealed to me. Before departing that day, I observed singles mothers leaving their hotel with their children on their way to school. Empty cereal boxes and other things were discarded into the bins, and I admired their courage at trying to keep some of normality for their children. This was the day that I'd made a prior booking at my hotel, as I knew I would not be camping in London. It was to be my treat day and to have access to a shower before I arrived at the manor. I was on the doorstep of the Roman Way Market, and I had an easy walk through Tottenham, Clapham Common, and into the Bow. I walked a total of 14 miles and noted the marked segregation of the different cultures that were there. I was able to rest and to catch the tube into London and enjoy the lights with a friend in the evening. However, I had no way of charging Wally. So day 6 was my final day, and with great excitement, I caught the tube to Bethel Green. I caught the tube to Stratford, and then to North Greenwich, which was the furthest south I could take, and then the bus to Eltham, and then to start the remaining miles, 17 miles, to the manor. I was very much aware that I didn't have sufficient battery time for the journey, so I bought a plug to charge, and I was directed to the nearest Costa. I sat at the table for 4 individuals and happily sipped my coffee and watched the batteries charging. After 30 minutes, I started to chomp as time was passing, and the batteries were not charging at the pace that I required them to do so. I had a lot of walking ahead of me, and I felt as though I was wasting time. Then a gentleman arrived on a mobility scooter and placed himself diagonally opposite me. By now, Costa was getting busy, and the staff were not able to assist him. He was non-verbal and had cerebral palsy, and with the aid of his tablet, he was able to place his order. I assured the waitress that I would assist him. We did our best to communicate, and I helped place his bacon butty into his hands and told him to wipe his chin when he'd finished eating. He allowed me to take a photograph of the message that he sent to me, which says, "I feel much better for my coffee and breakfast." And I couldn't agree with him more. I looked down at my Wally, and it was fully charged, and we both departed together. I did a total of 17 miles through the Kent countryside and a long climb up to the manor. Just before entering Kent, I met Bramble, who needed to give me numerous hugs of encouragement. It was a time of digging deep again as I was getting closer to my destination, and my sister in the US walked me mile by mile. With 2 miles to go, I was overcome with emotion and just cried and was so grateful to have survived the very narrow Kent country lanes and not being knocked over so close to home. I succeeded in arriving at the manor, and I realized that it was not about the journey. It was all about the people that I met along the way. I left with a plan, but God, being God, had another plan. I developed the blister on the morning of my departure, and my past endurance sports events, I knew where I had to go with my mind. I learned the importance of traveling light and to trust God. He will always make a way. So Philippians 4:13 became my scripture, where I can do all things through Christ Jesus who strengthens me. And that sustained me. And Apple Music, who kindly, unbeknownst to me, put together a 9-hour playlist of all my boom boom praise and worship music with the right tempo to keep me going. This was my first retreat, and as I reflect back over the weekend that I shared with my reunion friends and newly found friends, with Ian Mayo and the Oak Hall staff, Lisa Rose and Steve Lancaster for the World of the World, I realised that it's not about the glistening buildings that draw the crowds of Tottenham Hotspurs or the churches across the road that are battling to maintain and heat their buildings. It's about Jesus loving people and getting together to love each other in an environment that is safe to do so, to encourage and build each other up, to listen to testimonies and speak life into each other. I would like to read Ephesians 4:3-6. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as we are called in one hope when we are called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. I'd like to thank Pastor Nihad and his congregation who were praying for me and for their very encouraging messages along the route. For my friends Tom and Ray, for the NEC, Andrew and Jill, my Keep Smiling group, my Facebook friends, Nikki Sargent, my family and Deb. And thank you for sharing the journey with me.